Hi again, everybody. My name is Chris Sheeman, and welcome to There's Too Many Podcasts. It's a podcast about podcast. Today's guest is Joe Mars. He is the Harbinger of Fun. We're going to learn a little bit about what makes things fun. And that, of course, is subjective to you and to what you like and to what I like and to what Joe likes. But there is a formula as a video game developer that he has found. We also talk a little bit about Joe's life and how he got. It's a really interesting story. His podcast idea is brilliant. And Harbinger of Fun, again, is the name of his podcast. So we'll get to Joe in a moment. As we are just underway here in Season 1, I want to encourage those of you who haven't done so, follow us on social media. I know I said in the first couple episodes that we were on Blue Sky. We're not on Blue Sky anymore. I'm trying real hard. I am on Twitter. I'm not calling it whatever he wants me to call it. It's still Twitter to me. So you can find me on Twitter at Chris Sheeman, or just by searching Chris Sheeman Media. That is me, the quote-unquote producer of this podcast. You can also find the podcast itself on Instagram and also on Threads at There's Too Many Podcasts. And, of course, the website, There's Too Many Podcasts.com. Now, let's go back to the Harbinger of Fun, Joe Mars. A really nice man. Really enjoyed talking to him earlier today. It's very interesting, his take on not only life, but what makes things fun. And the idea for his podcast, we get into it a little bit, but this is really more a conversation about life, I guess, with Joe. He's had a difficult path to get to where he is. He is, what I'm finding, one of a number of just resilient people who maybe didn't think that his life could go the way that it eventually turned out. And he was able to flip the switch. He was able to really make all of his dreams come true, at least I hope so, in the way that he wanted from a very young age. And it's always interesting to me to talk to really creative people. I like to think I'm creative. After talking to really creative people, I know just how Big Bang Theory average of a guy that I am. Joe's one of those guys. He actually reminds me, and we'll bring this up in the podcast, but of one of my friends who wasn't a great student, but was just a genius in other ways, and he was able to kind of turn his life into creative avenues in the same way that our guest here today has. So, anyways, don't forget, like, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. Do all that with There's Too Many Podcasts. In the meantime, please enjoy this interview with the Harbinger of Fun himself. Here's Joe Mars. Boy, maybe I should have left that in. If you're just joining us, by the way, Joe, I've pressed play. Here's the thing. Every time we start the podcast, because we don't have any previous podcasts for my guests to go back and listen to, basically what happens here is we're recording, we're good to go, but I kind of wish I was recording about a minute ago so you can hear the dumb white guy that I am trying to pronounce this man's name. Joe Mars, but let me try this. Joe...
Okay.
I can't get the D in there, Joe. Joe, I give up. Let's just go with Joe Mars. Joe, how are you, man?
I'm doing very well. Nice to meet you.
Is this the worst, most awkward intro to a podcast ever? Probably.
Well, no, I have my own podcast that I've had a lot more experience doing awkward intros. So
God bless
this is fine.
Yeah. Harbinger of Fun is the podcast, by the way, and we're kind of get into the podcast, but I'm really curious about the idea, and
Sure.
I kind of want to start here in 2024 by asking you this: do you think people actually want to have fun anymore?
Oh, yes. Everyone wants to have fun. Everyone needs to have fun. Fun is the reason why we do anything that we're not required to do.
I mean, honest to God, if you go online, it just feels like people being miserable is their own kind of fun. Am I wrong there?
No, there's definitely a lot of misery. I think it's a way to mitigate your misery is by projecting it onto other people and to sort of control the outcome. If you say everything is horrible, then you're not disappointed when things turn out horrible. But ironically, you are sort of setting yourself up for horrible things to happen to you.
That is exactly who I am. You just described me right there in that little 15-second clip. I am always anticipating the worst.
Hmm.
And then if it works, if it goes that way, it goes that way, and then if it doesn't, it's like, okay, maybe not. But
Yeah.
it's just a very interesting concept, and it's a very interesting idea, and it comes from you, a guy who has a background, I guess you would call it in fun, right?
Yeah, so I've been working for 20 years in the video game industry. I've worked on League of Legends, and I've worked with Nickelodeon and Game Show Network and Walt Disney Imagineering on an attraction at Disneyland. And I designed Jurassic World VR Expedition at Dave and Buster's, but also I dabbled a little bit in pro wrestling and stunt work and stage comedy
Now wait a
previously.
minute, hold up. Were you doing the stunt work? Were you like the fill-in guy? What is that?
Yeah, I was no, I was I wasn't a stunt double for anyone. I was like I got killed in a couple B movies. I was in a couple music videos for the punk group Against Me, where I
Oh,
was
wow, really?
yeah, I was like getting beaten up and stuff like that.
Oh
So
my God, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time.
yeah, they're a great band.
That's old, like Warp Tour stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And so my background is pretty varied when it comes to creating fun entertainment for an audience. So it's not just digital, it's also like stage performances and things like that. So I have the whole time I've been focusing on what makes something fun universally, and that's where I get my foundation from.
All right, I want to go back here. What were you like as a kid?
Oh, man. That's yeah. When I was a kid, I I was very until I turned like 13 or 14, I think like most people, I was very like excited about the future. And I was very energetic and I would draw comic books and I would draw games like on paper. Like I was making my own Atari games like on paper. Um and so I was just creating like fun content and I didn't know that's what it was yet. I was just sort of living in that world. I lived in my own world for sure.
I had a friend. Were you a good student?
I was passable.
That's
Just
kind of, yeah. I have a friend who's very creative, and in fact, he came to mind because when you mentioned Against Me, I'm sure he knows them. He was always on Warp Tour and doing all of these things, but just a creative genius. Like when we were kids, he would be drawing the comic books, and we would kind of do it together. And then I took a look at his drawings and my drawings, and I was like, "Holy shit, Bobby! Maybe I'll do the content and you draw." And that's kind of what we did with our comic books when we were like 5 or 6 or however old we were.
yeah.
But he was a horrible student, and that's why I asked. I was just kind of curious. I'm always curious about the creative types and what kind of kids they were. Um, so this childhood passion, I guess, kind of never went away for you, or when you got older, when you thought about what you wanted to do with your life, was this kind of stuff always in the back of your mind?
Yeah, I think you're sort of born knowing what you want to do or having um, a certain aptitude for certain things. And I think as you get older, like life starts to bog you down and you start to acquire these like limitations.
Yeah.
So I've always been creative and always like creating experiences for other people. Like, and then, sorry, I forgot your question.
So did I. Welcome to my world. This is what season one is all about, figuring it out.
Yeah.
No, I asked, did you always know you wanted to do something along these lines for a career?
Yeah, yeah. When I was like 13 or 14, I was reading, I believe, Electronic Gaming Monthly. It's a magazine. They used to be in stores.
Yeah,
Um,
they there was these things on paper, and
yeah,
it was glossy, a lot of them, and there were pictures, and yeah, it's
yeah. It's like someone printed out a web article. Anyway, so I used to read it, and I read an interview with, I believe, the creator of Earthworm Jim, and which is a video game for the Super Nintendo. And that's when I realized, like, oh, like there are humans who design these games, and I was like, that's like the craziest job ever to be a game designer. And I really wanted to do it, but at the same time, I grew up in East Los Angeles, which is a very like poor neighborhood, and there's a lot of gangs and a lot of it's just not at the least at the time in the 90s, early 90s, it wasn't a great neighborhood. And so I didn't have any there was no path for me, especially without the internet. You can't see how different people do things. So I couldn't see a way to ever accomplish my dream. But I also wanted to be a pro wrestler. And for some reason, I thought that was easier because it was more physical. Like I didn't have to be super smart and program and super artistic and do crazy art. Like I could do the physical thing. And so I saved up money and I trained to be a pro wrestler. And then when I went to wrestling school, I found out that pro wrestling, is the hardest thing anyone can ever do. And when I got done with that, my bar for my own like limitations was raised so high that I immediately rolled into game design school, and kind of the rest is history.
wow, this is very interesting. See, I would have, if I made an assumption there, would have thought that, oh, here's a guy who designs video games. Maybe he designed a wrestling game. Maybe Macho Man was there recording, and that's how you would go into the wrestling part. But it's actually the flip of that. And yeah, I think almost everybody knows WWE. Those things are, it's scripted, but
Mhm.
that does not mean that these men and women are not athletes. It's got to be crazy training.
Oh yeah, it was hard on every level. Like when you take a bump, that's like when you fall like on your back on the floor, or just you fall and crash through something or whatever. It's a new kind of pain. That's how I described it, because there's the physical pain that we're used to, and then there's like emotional pain, like breaking up with someone.
Right.
But then this is like an internal pain, like like all your organs are being bruised and smashing against each other, and plus you're like you all your air gets pushed out, and it's a new kind of pain. So but a quick fun note on that was, when I was there, I actually wrestled the Miz, who is a WWE star now, and he was like WWE champion a few years ago. And so I went to school with him, so he was like still a student. So
Wow, that's very cool. Man, some of
yeah.
this is really interesting. Let's go back a little bit to growing up in East LA, and
Mhm.
I mean, I think for like I said at the beginning of the podcast, dumbass white boys like me, we got our education on what that life was like through hip hop, through rap music, through Dr. Dre, basically, and that whole crew. But in reality, why do you think it is that you said to yourself, well, I could do the physical, but this other passion that I have is not a possibility?
Because when I was like 13 or so, when I was reading about the game designer, I saw like, okay, there's an art aspect. Like you have to be a trained artist, to do a part of this. And then there is a technical aspect. You have to program things and you have to be really good at math. And there was no one around me in my community that were programmers or were fine artists in that way. And plus I wasn't amazing at school, like we established, mostly because school is boring to me, because it didn't resonate with me, and that's
Right.
a part of fun. So school was very boring to me. So I'm like, well, I'm not getting great grades, because I thought I was bad at school. And turns out I was just bored. But
Right.
also, there's no role models essentially for this kind of career. Like there's no way for me to know how you even get started on this path. But for pro wrestling, that's more of a physical thing. Like you have to be like physically fit, and you don't necessarily have to be an amazing programmer or have the other things worked out. And I'm like, well, I know I can do a physical part
Right.
because I could run track and stuff like that. So
And of course,
it,
you're thinking. People got to remember you're thinking as a kid. Obviously, this is all in hindsight.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. This is all with my 13-year-old brain.
Right.
So it seemed more feasible that I can do the wrestling part versus the game part, which I felt like you had to be born in a certain family or had a certain have a certain amount of wealth to do. And so yeah, that was the situation at the time.
I'm curious now. Now that you have made it in your way, in the way that maybe you secretly did want to at that age, do you pay it forward somehow? Do you encourage other kids? Anything like that going on in the community there with you?
Yeah, so I'm mentorship is a huge part of my career now. So I about 10 years ago I was a big for Big Brothers of Los Angeles, Big Brothers Big Sisters,
Uh huh.
and so I had a little, but I also mentored at Women in Games International because the most underserved community is women in games because there's so few of them. And I know because I work for a lot of game studios, and there's a very big lack of women there, and they don't get the same opportunities men do. And so I actively not only mentor women in games, and I have mentored women in games and help them along their careers, but also as a manager, when I manage design teams, I do help promote the women on the team so they can have a fair opportunity. And really, they just need a platform because they have the skills and the passion. They're just usually not given the opportunity. So I do that regularly. Yeah.
Well, that's very cool. I mean, this is not where I thought this story was going to go, but it's kind of interesting doing these podcasts. Here in season one, we're early on, but just kind of listening to adversity that people have gone through and passions that people have that they feel very strongly about. This is a very, very interesting story. So, all of your background now here has kind of resonated into this podcast. Harbinger of Fun is the name of the podcast from Joe. And, it looks like you're pretty early on in this, if I'm understanding that correctly. But just kind of tell me about what this idea or how this idea came to you.
Yeah, so probably in 2009 or so, I started. I had a, so I do have an origin story for this. I was in college and I had a level design teacher in the game who worked in games, and I designed this level for a first person shooter, and he played it, and he said, "This isn't any fun." And I naively asked him, "Well, what makes something fun?" And he said, "Well, if I knew that, I would be a millionaire." And I had two thoughts at the time. One was, it'll be nice to be a millionaire.
Yeah.
But two was that if this game design teacher didn't have an answer for what makes something fun, and he makes fun for a living, it's possible that there's probably not a lot of people who've seriously looked into this single subject. And that began my odyssey of finding the answer to what makes something fun.
15 years
And
ago.
yeah, yeah. And so since then, I've been focusing throughout everything I've worked on for like Disney and video games and VR and all that stuff. I've been focusing on what's the fundamental base for what makes something fun. And that part of it is the podcast where I ask Disney Imagineers and comic book writers and all pro wrestlers or whoever. I ask them, how do you make fun in your product? Just to get like more data, but also to help people who are trying to create an entertainment product in general.
I guess if you're going to spend time, you're probably used to meticulous things. I have to think game development is fairly meticulous.
Yeah.
So this is a process that maybe 15 years ago you're okay taking your time with the answer. But have you found, is there a singular answer?
There is.
Okay.
Um, You'll have to tune in next episode.
Oh
But
no,
no,
come on.
no, that's part of it is anticipation. So yes, there is. In short, fun is discovery that the user cares about. That's the shortest answer for it. There are 5 steps to fun. The first step is psychological safety. So the person needs to feel like this is safe. So if I if I threw you off a building, would you say you're going to have fun? Probably not.
Well, it
Um,
depends on the day, Joe. I'm from the Midwest. We got that self-loathing thing going on. I might. I might.
oh, okay. I might be fulfilling a
Nine
fantasy.
times out of 10, no, probably not. You're right.
Yeah, but if I put a parachute on you and you are said like, oh, thousands of people have done this and it's safe to do, then
Right.
that's different. That puts you in a different mindset.
Right.
um and it goes for as much as physical safety as well as psychological safety. Like if I'm uh there's no other. Politics is the best example because it's so universal. Let's say I'm super right, and if somebody is starting a joke about the left, I'm probably not going to laugh at that joke because I don't feel safe because they're attacking my belief system, you know?
Right.
So that's another version of safety. So the first step is it needs to feel safe. Um, the second step is resonate. So the person, it needs to touch on you as a person, or at the very much you have to understand what's going on with the premise or whatever it is, because we're exposed to so many things throughout the day that if it doesn't immediately grab our attention, we just shoo it away. We're not going to pay attention to it. So the thing needs to resonate. Then once it resonates, it needs to be engaging. And all engagement is just focus. You need to keep the user's focus for as long as you need to do whatever payoff it is. So if you're telling a joke, you need to keep them focused for like 30 seconds or whatever. If you're showing a movie, you need to keep them focused for 2 hours.
Right.
So stuff like that. Once you have engagement, which is step 3, step 4 is tension. And specifically, I'm talking about dopamine fun, which is that high, energy, like American type fun where there's thrills and, stuff like that. There's another fun called serotonin fun where you're just chilling and you're hanging out and you're just absorbed in the environment. That's one type of fun. But the fun I specialize in is this dopamine fun. So after you have engagement, you need tension, and tension means that the users understand and they care about what's going on, but they don't quite know the answer that's going to happen next. So they don't know if Fonz is going to make it over the shark, or they don't know if Captain America is going to beat Thanos, or whatever the question is, because you've set up a very interesting premise that they don't know the answer to. And then what fun is step 5 is discovery. So discovery, Christoph Waltz has a really great quote where he says, "Laughter is the cutting of tension," and that's sort of precisely it. Is that once you cut the tension with discovery, that's what fun is. And you have to time it right. And comedians are very good at timing that cutting of tension. And that goes across pro wrestling, movies, stand up comedy, whatever your entertainment avenue is.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's kept me. I've always kind of had this thing in the back of my mind that I can come up with 3 minutes for stand up, but I really think that timing thing is something that is gifted. I don't think that's, well, I do think you can learn it over time, but it's a gift. It's a real skill, and anybody can make people laugh. There's a lot of funny guys in the office kind of a thing, but
Mm-hmm.
that timing thing, whoa, that's real tough. Now, some of these
Yeah.
things you've described to me here, have you seen this kind of concepts get into the wrong hands and be used to make somebody have fun, but make somebody an addict?
Yeah, all the time. And they do it in games a lot, and so it is. Although I am from the game industry, I'm very much unbiased when it comes to stuff like this. So there's a lot of sort of very sneaky techniques that make the user stay in the game and not want to leave the game because it's designed that way. Because the best way to to get engagement is to never lose it.
Right.
And so when there's Farmville, for example, they used to do this a lot where you would go plant a tomato or whatever, and it's like, oh, the tomato's done in 1 minute. Oh, but my apple tree is done in 5 minutes. Oh, but my lettuce is done in an hour. So they
Mm-hmm.
have all these timers on you, and so they have your attention captured for these various times. And when are you supposed to leave?
Right.
So yes, there are some studios that do this in a very negative way, and I do think it is a little irresponsible for game designers or companies actually to work in this fashion, knowing that some people don't understand what's happening to them because they feel like it's all organic.
Exactly. Yeah, they think they're having fun, but fun becomes I don't know. I guess sinister. But let's talk a
Yeah,
little bit about some of your podcast, and we've kind of already hit on some of these topics, but just to go a little more in depth, one of the interesting things when I got your request and when I got your info that when I started listening to your podcast, I thought, oh my God, this is a podcast about fun, and there's tons of them with mental health experts on it. Um, just give me that connection there like I said, I've listened to a few of them. My listeners may or may not have not. So let's assume that we're all going into this blind. But some of these topics that you get into with mental health experts in your podcast about fun.
yeah. So there's a small element of when you're creating fun for an audience, you have to understand the psychology of the audience. Um, because what you're doing is like, as a game designer, but anyone in entertainment, you're thinking like, what is the user thinking, what are they experience, and then how will they receive this thing. You have to always be in the user's head. So there's a little bit of that, but mostly the reason why I have mental health professionals on is because part if you really want to make something fun at its core, it goes to the individual, the creative person who's designing it. And a lot of companies don't take care of their creative people, and they don't treat them in a fair manner, and but they expect them to create this golden egg. And how you really create a fun product, or if you're the manager of a creative team, the way you really get the best out of your team is you have to care about them. You have to give them a safe place to express themselves. And almost like somehow what makes something fun is psychological safety. The basis for creating an environment that creatives can make their best work is creating a psychologically safe environment so they're not afraid to speak up and they're not afraid to express themselves, because creative people are very sensitive.
Hey, tech bros, are you listening to this? Joe's spitting some facts at you right now because, yeah, you could pretty much. I mean, it's not just the tech industry; they're the ones who are kind of being thrown under the bus right now. But that's literally any job I ever had. It's one of the reasons why I started working for myself. Is
Hmm.
all of these people are exact opposites of what you're describing there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that's yeah, like you can't do any of this without the creative team, and you can't have fun if you don't have a fun environment for the most part as well. And so it starts with the psychology of your creatives, and again, creative people are sensitive by nature. And so it's even more important that you create an environment for them. It's not just about their output.
I struggle sometimes myself, and I like to do things that are fun. Who doesn't?
Hmm.
I like to watch. I have to watch light comedies. I cannot watch everybody's asking me, well, a few years ago, Orange is the New Black and The Handmaid's Tale. I cannot watch any of that stuff.
Hmm.
A, because partly we're living some versions of some of these things, and B is when I'm done with my day, even if I've had a great day, it just has to be light or it's sports, which is, I guess, my own version of drama, you could
Uh-huh.
say. But it's got to be The Simpsons. It's got to be Futurama. It's got to be Abbott Elementary. It's got to be. I have to laugh. So you
Uh-huh.
did an interesting topic on one of your podcasts about why are horror movies fun? And this
Oh
is
yeah.
one that just piques my anxiety because I can't watch anything like this. And I'm just curious your thoughts there.
Yeah. So if we isolate one step, which is tension, you can see how it's very easy to build tension in a horror movie because
Yeah.
yeah, it's almost too easy because you're dealing with like creepy stuff or life and death and these very dark ideas. So, but also the first step is resonating, and there are some people who do like the darker side of life, who do like the occult, they do like zombies, they like ghosts, they like all that. Like that stuff is speaks to them. And so for that audience, because it resonates for them, they're going to be interested in that type of entertainment. And then of course it's also very easy to create tension. And then when you relieve that tension, that's where you have fun. So it's agnostic
Hmm.
of the theme. That's the best way to say it.
That's a really interesting point. Are you a basketball fan at all?
I used to be when the Lakers were winning all the time in the 90s and the 2000s.
Right.
I've since dropped off. I'm a bandwagon fan,
I gotcha.
unfortunately. Yeah.
Well, anyways, there's a basketball coach who I used to be on the bus with him all the time. His name is Kurt Miller, and he's the LA Sparks coach right now.
Hmm.
And he loved Saw movies. And every time we would have a long road trip, and we'd be debating, he's the head coach. There was no debating, but anyways, we'd be debating what movie. He'd be in that front seat, Saw, 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 and it just that whole conversation made me think of him because he is a light, jovial person in real life, or at least when I knew him, he was. But he liked the darkest shit. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, and everyone is wired differently. Like some people like that. Some people they're very jovial. Some people are very serious, but they like goofy things. And um, that's why the first step is resonate in making something fun, because once you can figure out who your audience is and what they like, then you can do the rest of it. But if you don't get that part first, all the other stuff you do, engagement, tension, discovery, all that doesn't matter.
And that's why there's a balance. There's a lot of different things. I can have my comedies, or I guess I'm thinking right now in the back of my head while you were talking, I'm thinking about this South Park episode where Butters is playing Hello Kitty Island Adventure, and the rest of them are playing the shoot 'em out game, and
Yeah.
I'm Butters in that scenario. But that's why you have these different games. So,
Yeah.
there's Island Kitty adventures for people like me, and then there's the, doom and gloom game for people who enjoy that. And finding that balance has to be really interesting as a game developer. I'm thinking about it also because I work in marketing from that
Hmm.
perspective.
Hmm.
Because in marketing, you want to try to draw in as many people as possible. So having things, like a funny horror movie, a silly horror movie would probably draw somebody like me in who would normally watch a horror movie. And
Uh,
is there any kind of correlation like that or conversations like that in the video game world?
yeah, usually when you're the first thing you do when you design a game is you figure out who your audience is. Um, and you don't really go further than that until you figure out like, okay, this is for fighting game fans, or this is for casual gamers who with puzzle elements, things like that. And then you start defining what the pillars of the game are, and then you design it with the audience in mind, because you know it has to resonate with the certain audience. So if I'm making a game for 7-year-olds, I'm probably not going to put blood and stuff, and I won't have any of that type of like imagery in there. So yes, you do always think about the audience, but you also want to think about how to make it as accessible as possible.
Yeah,
And it's
commercial.
not just yeah, it's not just from the content. It's also like the controls and the UI, the user interface, the user experience. So it's a lot more broader as well, that concern.
I'm curious, do you have people breathing down your neck about stuff like that when you're trying to create these things?
About like thinking about the audience and stuff like that.
Right.
It's usually the other way around.
Hmm.
Um, I'm usually developing something, and the company I work for doesn't understand. the audience. So I always and it's also because because a game designer, they deal with the game design, they deal with the editor design, they talk to the programming team, they deal with the artists, they deal with the animators, the lighting, the story, the math. They kind of or touch everything. So the game designer is always, for the most part, they're always going to have a deeper visibility on where the user can get stuck or where the audience can get stuck. So more often than not, it's the game designer who kind of sees these issues first, and then they'll bring that up to like the higher ups on the company and say like, oh, we need to chill on this because this audience probably won't understand this aspect or something like that.
Joe Mars, Harbinger of Fun is the name of the podcast. And Joe, before I let you go here, is there anything about fun, anything that you've discovered in this journey of your life that we haven't talked about, we haven't touched upon, that you think would be important for the general audience to know about?
Yes. And it's that what I found is the thing that really, so I've just talked about like what makes something fun as far as like the formula goes, but the what really creates products and products that are truly are the most fun that people like talk about, like your Pac-Mans, your Angry Birds, like the Sopranos, stuff that sort of comes out of nowhere that people
Right.
love. It comes from a very authentic expression in the designer, because they're not working on tropes, they're not working on what's been done before. They're sort of speaking from a very vulnerable place, and that is really what makes something fun, because what you're doing is you're discovering how this person thinks because they're unfiltered. And the more you can encourage designers and developers to be safe, the more you can create a safe environment for them to be vulnerable and to be authentic, the more you're going to have those cool, groundbreaking products like Among Us and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's sort of the heart. It's like I remember Bonnie Raitt, fabulous musician, brilliant songwriter. When she got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, she said, "If you believe what you are singing about, it will resonate with people." And I have established myself as a bit of a cynic here on this episode. I don't think people are overall very intelligent, but what I do think is that people's brains are very adept at spotting bullshit. And
Yeah.
if you can be authentic, and like you said, if you are working for somebody who allows you to be authentic, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also why I'm not too afraid of artificial intelligence as well, because artificial intelligence can replicate what's been done, but it can't invent something. Um, and it can, when you let these creative people express themselves authentically from their lens of life, AI doesn't have a lens of life. It didn't go to kindergarten and college and all that. It doesn't have a point of view. So as long as I would say to people who own studios out there, if you really want to have an edge over AI, create an environment for your creative people to express themselves more vulnerably.
It sounds simple, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Harbinger of Fun is the podcast, and Joe, I assume it's everywhere that you can get your podcast.
Yep. Yep. By
And
Apple, Spotify, everywhere.
as far as your website, social medias, anything you want to let the people know if they want to follow you?
Yeah, harbingeroffun.com. That goes to my TikTok, my LinkedIn. You can find me at Joe Morris on LinkedIn. I think it's linkedin.com/Joe Method, which was my podcast from 14 years ago. uh, and yeah, on josephmorris.com, my full name.
All right,
So
Joe. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time, a little insight into what makes things fun. People enjoy.
yeah, thank you so much. I also have a book coming out. It's on the website.
Oh, wait a minute. Let's not go anywhere. What's the book?
The book is called Blueprint for Fun.
There you go.
Yep.
More along the same lines, I imagine.
Yeah, I document all this stuff so you guys have a clear way of looking through all the nuances of it.
Yeah, it's very, very cool idea. I highly encourage you to go read the book, go check out the podcast. And once again, Joe, thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been great.